You know, when I was your age, one of my favorite things to do was to go camping with my family, and especially when my pap was there. You see, when my pap was there, he would tell us stories. In fact, most of the stories I tell today are the stories I learned from my pap. Well, this one I'm going to tell you, he said was a true story, and my pap said everything he said was true except for the parts that aren't, so I think this is pretty much a true story that he told me. He said it wasn't too far away from here that, well, there was a farmer. And that farmer, he was a hard-working man, and he had this habit going out in the fields all day long, and then when the evening came, he would go to his refrigerator, or they called it an ice box back then because they put a big old block of ice inside of it to keep things cool. Well, he would open up that ice box of his, reach in, and pull out a bottle of milk. Now, each and every night he would do this. He would take that bottle of milk and pour it in to this bowl. He would take that nice, cool bowl of milk, pick it up, drink it down, and then he'd go to bed. He did this every day of his life. He would work out in the fields, come home in the evening, open up that ice box, reach in, grab that bottle of milk, pour it slowly into that bowl. Take that nice, cool bowl of milk and then make his way to bed. Now, that old farmer, he lived alone, but he didn't know that he had a visitor every night just watching him do that. You see, far in the corner, and well, in the dark corner of the kitchen, there was this little mouse. And this little mouse wanted more than anything in the world just to get a little tiny sip of that cool bowl of milk. And he would watch that farmer every evening just waiting for his chance. But that chance never came until one night. You see, the farmer came in from the fields like he did every night, and he looked into the ice box and he pulled out that bottle of milk and poured it into that bowl. And just as he was ready to pick up that bowl, he heard a sound in the other room. Well, he knew he lived alone, so curious as to what it was, he stood up and he walked into the other room to see what it was. Well, just at that very minute, you can imagine what that mouse did. That mouse ran from his dark corner, scampered up the leg of the table, jumped up onto the table, jumped up onto the edge of the bowl, and just looked down at that sea of white. His chance had come. Well, he grabbed onto the edge of that bowl and leaned down over, and he stuck his tongue out as hard as he could. He got a sip of that milk. Oh, it was cool and it was delicious. But it wasn't enough. Well, he reached down even further, dipped his paw in, and when he did, bloop, he flipped over the edge of the bowl straight into the milk, and there he was, swimming in a sea of white milk. Well, life couldn't be better for him. He splashed and he swam, and he was just licking the milk as it splashed onto his face and in his tongue, and then he didn't even notice that the bowl was being lifted up. Well, it was so dark that night, too, that the farmer didn't even notice that there was a mouse inside his nice, cool bowl of milk. And he picked up that bowl, and he drank it down like he did every night, along with that mouse. Well, that evening, the farmer did go to bed as he usually did, but there was something bothering him. It felt like there was something moving around in his stomach, and he couldn't figure out for the life of him what it was. He had done nothing different that night. He had worked as he usually did. He went into his ice box and got his milk like he did every night. And he couldn't figure out why his stomach was so upset. Well, the next morning he got up to eat breakfast, and that little mouse started making his way up the man's throat to get out. But just at that moment is when that farmer ate his breakfast. And with his breakfast, he had juice, and he had bananas, and he had eggs, and he had pancakes. He had a big farmer's breakfast. And when that mouse saw all that juice and all those pancakes and all those eggs coming down that man's throat, there was only one thing to do, and that was to open his mouth. And when he did, all those delicious foods, why, that little mouse was in heaven. And he decided at that very moment to stay in that man's stomach. Why, life couldn't be better. Just open up your mouth and all these delicious delicacies came tumbling down. Well, this went on for a few days, and the man decided that, well, there was something terribly wrong in his belly, that he would go see the doctor. Well, when he went to the doctor did his usual exam, and he tested his eyes and his ears, and he had him open up his mouth, and he stuck one of those wooden tongue depressors in there and told him to say ah. And he stuck it in there, and that man opened his mouth and he said, say ah. And when he did, he went The doctor couldn't believe what he was hearing. He said, let's try that again. And he stuck the tongue depressor in that farmer's mouth, and there it was again. It was unmistakable. It was the squeak of a mouse. There was no doubt about it. And that doctor knew right there and then what was wrong with the man. He said, Farmer, I've got bad news for you. You've swallowed a mouse, and there's really nothing I can do except to cut it out. Well, the farmer didn't want to go through any kind of surgery, so he decided that he would just live with the mouse in his stomach. But as the days passed, it really started to bother him, and all the folks around, they started hearing about the mouse in the farmer's belly, and they started giving him ideas. And he decided to try one of them, one last desperate idea to get that mouse out of his stomach. And here's what they told him to do. Everybody knows that mice love cheese. And everybody knows that they love to nibble on bits and crackers laying on the floor. So here's what you need to do. You need to cut yourself a big hunk of cheese and take that cheese and put it in your mouth. And take all those cracker crumbs and sprinkle them in there. And when that mouse smells that cheese and knows those crumbs are up there, why, he will come scampering up. But have your cat ready. And when that cat smells that mouse, he'll reach out and snap it. And that will be the end of that mouse. Well, the farmer liked that idea. So that evening, after he drank his cold bowl of milk, and that mouse just stood there with his mouth wide open, watching that milk flow down. He waited for that farmer to go to bed. But when that farmer went to bed, he cut himself a big hunk of cheese, and he Did you get all that? What I said is he took that big hunk of cheese and he put it inside his mouth. And then he took all those cracker crumbs and crumbled them up and sprinkled them in there with it. And he lay down to go to bed. Getting ahead of myself. What I said was, he took that big hunk of cheese and he put it in his mouth and he sprinkled those cracker crumbs everywhere. And that little mouse in his belly, he could smell that cheese. He could hear those cracker crumbs, and he wanted more than anything in the world to go up and just have a little taste of it, and he couldn't resist. In the meantime, the farmer took his cat, brought him in the room, closed the door so he couldn't get out, and lay down in his bed. And the farmer lay there with the cheese in his mouth and the cracker crumbs everywhere. He could smell the cheese. And just when he was ready to take a bite, that cat reached out, snagged that little mouse. And that was the end of that. And that is a story of how a man swallowed a mouse. Do you believe it? My pap said it was true.